With the things that are coming, from the White House, and they've changed a couple of times, we're going to figure out ways in which we can make sure that every student actually feels like they get the opportunities that they need to have.
UNLV's president talking with our 8 News Now investigators about one of the executive orders signed by President Trump.
More than 2 weeks now into the second Trump administration, and Americans are more divided than ever over some of the president's controversial policy changes.
One of those, his promise to undo diversity hiring practices in the government and in businesses and universities, including UNLV. 8
News Now investigator Kyle Payne with more on the war against DEI.
DEI would have ruined our country, and now it's dead. I think DEI is dead.
So, our president says it's time for the country to get on board, like it or not, and put a stop to what he calls the discriminatory practice of employers, namely businesses and universities, using D, diversity, E, equity, and I, inclusion. Now cutting off federal funding and essentially forbidding federal agencies from overemphasizing race, gender, and sexual orientation, and asking his new attorney general to pressure the private sector to build a workforce instead based on
merit. It's based on your capability. The United States has now become, again, a meritocracy. Isn't that a beautiful word, a meritocracy?
Making a meritocracy and doing away with DEI, calling it illegal, was one of President Trump's first orders of business.
Could you imagine Biden doing this? I don't think so.
Signing some 200 executive actions like these on the first day of his second term in office.
Just because the president said it doesn't mean it needs to happen or that it is right.
Rashi Jawade runs Embracing Equity, a Texas nonprofit focused on what she calls anti-racist mindsets and practices. Jawade knows Nevada, having spent some time working here in Las Vegas to further her cause, helping universities and running teacher prep programs.
First of all, we're not in a monarchy.
She says no matter what, companies and colleges need to fight for their employees with the hopes of making workplaces wholesome and humane, that Americans individually and collectively have the right to shape the government and not the other way around.
We're getting more and more diverse as a country. And so everybody within the United States, organizations included, need to figure out how we're going to operate.
The world, Jawade says, has changed. Around the time George Floyd was murdered by a police officer, and some corporations and universities responded by trying to combat racism institutionally. Then more followed along that path.
But then I think there was a whole slew of companies that were like, oh, like DEI is the name of the game right now.
The worlds of big business and higher education reacted quickly to the president ending DEI initiatives. The University of Michigan, located in a swing state, stopped its practice of asking for diversity statements as part of its hiring process in December, weeks before President Trump even took office. And a few days after the inauguration, Northeastern University in Boston, a historically Democratic city and a largely left-leaning Commonwealth, scrubbed all DEI language from its website. It impacted federal funding at Rutgers in New Jersey, leading us to wonder what's happening here on the campus of UNLV.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
So, on the afternoon of UNLV's State of the University address last week, we stopped in to see if the university president, Keith Whitfield, had anything to tell his audience about the changing political climate.
We have a new administration. It's going to bring change.
Change, Whitfield says, and a positive approach to the future. When we spoke with him after he got off stage,
We didn't become one of the most diverse campuses in the country through a DEI program. It was just who we are.
He downplayed UNLV's reliance on DEI. In fact, when we asked UNLV for its DEI policy, they gave us a statement that referred us to federal equal opportunities requirements and policies set by the State Board of Regents, adding, quote, "I'm not aware of any additional current or recent university-wide policies on this topic." But as recently as fall 2023, job descriptions for faculty positions said a successful candidate will, quote, "demonstrate support for diversity, equity, and inclusiveness." So we asked Whitfield again. Is that still the policy?
That's, for our policy, it's always been about talent. So, we try to get the best.
But there was a requirement in the job descriptions and online that it said you have to have a demonstrated DEI approach.
Well, it's typically that you have to be aware of those things. And so in a world where we value diversity, it's something that we thought of as one of those pieces of talent.
To acquire that talent, though, Whitfield doesn't mention this DEI scoring system, a series of questions with a grading system that evaluates a candidate's approach and commitment to diversity. The score sheet is one of several items on the UNLV website where even after the president's executive orders threatening its federal funding, DEI is front and center.
If you rank high enough, you score high. If you don't have a high DEI score, you score low and presumably would not be hired. So is that still how it works?
No, and that's really been a piece of it. I'm sure if we took a look at that, it would be one of a bunch of criteria. So, yes, it was a criteria.
And the only criteria, as you can see on this particular grading sheet, which is still posted on UNLV's webpage. Whitfield, though, says if the federal government says policies need to change, the university's policies will change. But eventually, we asked him,
what about the ideologues or the ideology that does not believe in the DEI, like, for instance, that align with the president? Is that being taught at UNLV?
Not being taught at UNLV. I think there have been some thoughts that, we're trying to brainwash people. It's like, no. What we try to do is to offer opportunities to be able to understand different perspectives. We're a national university.
A national university caught up in a national debate, now making its way from Washington all the way to Las Vegas, with inevitable debate in courtrooms and classrooms across the country. Kyle Payne, 8 News Now.
Now, the most recent target of President Trump's anti-DEI effort is the U.S. Department of Education, who saw dozens of its employees put on paid administrative leave this week in response to the president's order banning DEI programs in the federal government.